Good morning. Um, Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvius, Perek Hey Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Lamed Zayin. We left off on Daf Lamed Vav Amid Beis, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid, and we are dedicating today's class to Eloi Nishmas Ora Bat Shimon. So, in our Mishnah, in Halacha Beis, amongst many detailed rules regarding the luf, unique type of onion, that like all onions are planted in the ground, the bulb itself grows in the ground. These details will be important for today. And out of it grows leaves. The leaves protrude through and above. They are exposed outside of the ground. Both the bulb and the leaves are edible, perhaps when you cook them, but therefore they are all subject to the laws of Shavi'is. And the Mishnah spoke also about a case where you have the leaves of the luf on a luf onion, that part of them is from the 7th year and part of them is from the 8th year. Furthermore, we're speaking about a time that's after the Zman Habir, as we explained. And let me just add another nuance that we didn't mention yesterday, and that is that the luf, not an onion, the luf, unique, as we'll see, because of it being a unique type of onion and compounded with the fact that it's inside the ground, even during winter, it doesn't get withered away. So the bulb itself is never subject to biur because it's always found in the fields for the behemoths and the chayas. Found meaning it's not exposed, it's in the ground, but it's there. The leaves, however, winter makes them wither and fall away. So what happened here is that being that the leaves are subject to biur, and we're speaking about a person who gathered his luf, whatever the heichatimsa is in the Mishnah, that has on it leaves that are shvis and shminis, and he declared it ownerless. And now the owner took it back. And the question is, what does he owe if he owes anything to the aniyim? The words of the Mishnah is Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says that Yaseh Cheshben Imhu Aniyim, and Rabbi Yeshua says that Ein Laniyim Imoy Cheshben. He owes nothing to the aniyim. So the first approach of the understanding of this machlokes is based on a machlokes that we will have later in this Masechta. For those of us who are using these gemaras, the pagination of Daf Ayin Zayin, a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, regarding a bigger question. When I am fulfilling my obligation of biur, peiroi shvis, according to the Ramban and according to halacha, after which you can take it back, you only have to declare it hefker. Who is allowed to take it back? Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that only the aniyim are allowed to take it. Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion echad aniyim ve'echad ashirim oichlin achar habir, and therefore it's a simple connection. Rabbi Eliezer, who says that yaseh cheshbon imhu aniyim, Rabbi Eliezer follows Rabbi Yehuda. After biur, the guy took back his luf, which he's allowed to take, because there's no obligation of doing biur on the bulb itself. You can take back the luf. The leaves that grew, or the part of the leaf, the extension of the leaf that grew on the 8th year, it's his. That which belonged to the 7th year, even though he did the right thing, he did the biur, very nice, but you're not allowed to take it back. So it's that you have to pay to the aniyim. Now, how much, that's a detail the Mishnah doesn't mention, because every case is a case. We're speaking about farmers. They can be mishair, they can estimate, maybe you have to lean more on the stringent side, l'toivas aniyim, but the concept is you owe the aniyim. Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah that says that you don't have to make any type of cheshbon. Why? Because Rabbi Yeshua follows Rabbi Yossi that holds that even after you did biur, anyone can reclaim it, and therefore you reclaimed it. Very simple. That is where we left off. Now, to begin to understand the hemshech hadvarim prior to coming to the second approach that we will learn today, is let's quickly remind ourselves that there's something called sfichim. Sfichim is a plant that grows on shvi'is, spontaneously, without it being planted. Without it being planted. And midrabanan, really, I'll tell you, there's really a machloikas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, whether eating svichim is asan midoiraisa. Interestingly, so is Shitas Rabbi Akiva. We didn't learn the sugi yet inside, but we mentioned it already a few times. The Chachamim hold that the isur of eating svichim is midrabanan. So bear that in mind when we begin picking up the hemshech hasugya, because there's going to be a svichim issue. There's going to be some back and forth about that. And then, again, prior to coming to the second approach, the Gemara is going to bring to our attention a new challenge, which is, in our Mishnah, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, I'm quoting their words. They say, regarding these leaves, again, the case that we explained was that you took it on the 8th year, which is why some of it is from the 8th year. So the words that they say are that im laktu ha'aniyim es olav laktu. If the aniyim took their part, they took it. And if they didn't take it, that's the machlokes, whether you have to make a cheshbon or not make a cheshbon. And this statement will open up a whole new angle. How can the aniyim take it? As we'll see, the problem with that. And we're going to speak about another subsequent observation from this first approach. As we mentioned, the bulb itself is not subject to beer. So it's going to be a very deep conversation. When you have something, davar sheyesh loy beer, something that could be subject to beer, but it's connected to something that's not subject to beer. Who says it should be subject to beer? That kid is making a face. This is gewaldige. No, it's we're gonna learn this in detail, but this is such a good topic. Davar sheyesh loy beer shenimtza betoich davar she'ein loy beer. Well, yesh loy beer or ein loy beer. Bottom line is, all of this is going to close the first interpretation. With things resolved, with things not resolved, it doesn't matter. And we're going to introduce today a second interpretation behind the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, in which we're going to say that they both agree with Rabbi Yehuda that only the poor can acquire produce after they were declared ownerless. So the problem is, the question will be, why is there machlekes? So the nekuda will be like this, that we're going to add another detail as to what happened. What happened? What's the case? When was it planted? We'll get to that. You picked it on the 8th year, that's for sure. If not, it wouldn't be from the 7th and the 8th. But on the 7th year, there's a process called crushing. Dikun. New words. What's crushing? It's something that's done to the leaves in order to prevent it from growing. Why would they want to prevent it from growing? I don't know. But this crushing process happened. Now, sometimes, even though you crushed it, it still grows, which will be the case of the Mishnah. The second approach will be based on the Yesoid, that when we keep on mentioning that when it comes to the Yerakos, that it's achar likutoi, it has to do when you pick it, means you have to mamish pick it. Another step. The question will be whether crushing is like picking or is it not like picking. If crushing will be like picking, then this bulb that you picked on the 8th year was also picked on the 7th year by crushing it. So indeed, there are leaves from the 7th and the 8th. More details in the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua that says you don't have to make a cheshbon with aniyim. He holds that you know what year does something belong to of a vegetable when you physically picked it. Since you picked this whole loof on the 8th year, nothing in it is of the 7th. That's why you don't have to make a cheshbon with the aniyim, because even though he will agree with Rabbi Yehuda that if something is subject to beer and you declared it ownerless, you no longer can take it back. And if you take it back, you have to compensate them. It's not yours to take. But our Mishnah, the case that we gave, will be classified halachically as a loof only of the 8th year. Why? Because you picked it on the 8th year. Verstehst? That will be approach number 2. This is today's daf, and now we're going to jump inside. And Yakir, go drink a coffee and stop making faces. L'chaim. Okay, so let's go. 2 lines before the bottom. Rav Imi Again, we're linking the machlokes, the simple machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that aniyim, that it's only for aniyim. Yaseh cheshbon aniyim. Rabbi Yeshua holds like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi holds that both aniyim and ashirim can take it. So yeah, you have on it leaves of the 7th, leaves of the 8th. So what? You were mafked it. No one took it. You took it back. You get to keep it. Problem is, Rav Imi asked in front of Rabbi Yechanan just to remember that Rav Imi is a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. So he asked his teacher that it must be that Mas Nisa, that our Mishnah is speaking about prior to when the Chachamim made a Gzeira regarding Svicha. So first of all, there's a premise. Let Rabbi Akiva, like we mentioned in our words of introduction, this is not a Gzeira. Let Rabbi Akiva, it always was and always will be. It's a Doiraisa. So number one, he's taking it as a given that we go like the Chachamim, that the Isur of eating Svichim is Midrabanan. Now our Mishnah will make sense. You know why? Because the Mishnah is speaking about the time prior to this Gezed of eating Svichim. Why must we say it? Because like we mentioned in the words of introduction, and you can look back in the Mishnah, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua say these words that im laktu ha'aniyim es alav. If they pick the leaves, good for them. Hold on. Why isn't it asur to eat the leaves b'chlal? Svichim. You planted the luf on the 6th year. Sure they are, because it grew. No, that's called svichim, something that grew on its own. Planted on the 6th year. So, in other words, the whole thing should be asur. Look inside the last manafulda. Masnisa, the sharia lachila ad must be actually gozra ala svichim. Kidetran bepedic tes, kol asvichim are asurim. So you don't think about that. Now, Rabbi Mendel, you're on the right track. Now we have to define exactly how do you define svichim. When was this planted? Very good. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan told him, I'm your teacher. V'chi bo'aliyah ha'yisa. You have to have some culture. Many rabbinic decrees, for some reason, they were made in someone's attic. An attic would be in a private quarter versus in a public base medrash. I think they needed a certain amount of menuchas hanefesh to really have the foresight of understanding why, the cause and the effect. You know, they made this, the Shmoina Asodava was made by Elias, Hananya ben Goring, right? You have Aliyah many times. So that's just a slang that, were you there when they made it? Meaning, who told you they ever made a Gzeira? Why are you saying that this is something that's asur midrabanan? Maybe it's asur midoiraisa. Now the question becomes bigger. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara says from that comment, from that rebuttal, Savar Rav Imi Amar. Rav Imi understood that what is Rabbi Yechanan telling him? Were you there? Meaning, who told you it's an Isur midrabanan? This is not something that's made in an aliyah. Isur svichim are min haTorah. The problem is that the reason why Rav Imi made that statement is because something was bothering him. So he tried to find a solution. Rabbi Yechanan rejected a solution, but his problem is not resolved. The problem is, why wouldn't we say, how can anyone eat the leaves of the 7th year? Why should they not be asur mitzat svichim? So Amar Rav Yirmiyah, that what are we talking about over here? Ba'alei luf shoita hi masnisa. You have a regular luf, and then you have the word shoita when it comes to fruits and vegetables is wild. We're speaking about some sort of wild luf. And what's the yichus of a wild luf? That they can stay in the ground for many years and they keep on growing. And therefore, very good. When do we say that svichim are asur midoraisa or midrabanan? If it wasn't b'mitzius on the 6th year, it was, so to say, planted by itself. When? Of the 7th year. It's a growth of the 7th year. Our Mishnah is speaking about the onion was placed in the ground on the 6th year. A regular loof wouldn't last until the 8th year. Because don't forget, we're not changing the way we explained the Mishnah in the first approach. You picked it on the 8th year. You picked it noch after Zman HaBiur. After Zman HaBiur. Okay. Since you planted it on the 6th year, that takes away the entire problem because the Isur of Svicham apply only to produce that began on the 7th year. Now you have to appreciate the Chiddush over here. Why didn't, first of all, yeah, my son chopped it before, but it's a Chiddush this. Because when it comes to other ways of defining what year does a vegetable belong to, for example, when it comes to the dinim of biur has to do with when did you pick it, not with when you planted it. So mitamold, and that we're in the sugya, right? There's the critical point of development, and then you have the Rosh Hashanah. We're saying by Svichim, regardless when you picked it, Svichim is only contingent on when it was planted. Gewaldig.
That's Svichim with the farmer was taking seeds and planting them. There's like a few that he didn't intend to plant, but just fell.
No, I think the wind blows it. The wind blows it. The birds in nature does it. But the point is that Svichim doesn't mean something that grew on its own. It means something that began to grow on its own on the 7th year. And in other words, there's no issue with Svichim at all. So says Rabbi Yirmiyah. Hold on. Frag die Gemara that I saw Rab Hoshaya Masnisa, the Bar Kapara in the Roimon. Just to know, Bar Kapara was like an intermediate. We spoke about this many years ago. And people are more familiar with Rav, right? Rav Tano Palik. You had Ilfis. You have certain earliest Amoraim that were in the in-between phase of the Tanoim and the Amoraim. And particularly, why are you laughing, Rabbi Mendel? Bar Kapara had Braisas. So Rabbi and Rabbi Ishia, that's the Gemara in Chulin, Yakir, that any Braisa that was not taught in the academies of Rabbi and Rabbi Ishia are not necessarily authoritative. And they could be erroneous. They could be corrupted. Oh, we know that. But there were other earlier Amoraim that they were so early on that they were still the ones that had a compilation of works of Tanoim that were not in the Mishnah. So says the Gemara that Rabbi Shaya brought this type of Braisa. From whom? The ones that were compiled from Bar Kaparim and the Roimon. And in his Braisa, our din, the Machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, this case of the Mishnah, was taught explicitly, luf ve'alei p'tzalim. Now, a luf has in it a species that we're calling a luf shoita that can last for a couple of years in the ground. So it's shaykh to say that the case of a Mishnah is like we said, you put it in the ground on the 6th year, no issue of svichim. You picked it on the 8th year after the Zman HaBiur. You declared it hefker. You took it back. But if he's right, and the same achlokes is also by alei ptzalim, there is no such a thing as ptzalim shoitim. In other words, ptzalim, when they grow in one season. So how would it be possible if svichim are asan midrabanan, and this Mishnah is only before the time that they made the gzeir of eating svichim, so you can say the words that if the aniyim took it, they took it. What happens if they didn't take it, etc., etc. But you're telling me no, svichim is asan midoraisa from Rabbi Yechanan. So must be that, the only reason why Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shor were able to build up, before they spoke about their machlokes, what to do when the owner took it, first they said, if the aniyim took it, they took it, no one is allowed to take it, it's asam misum svichim. And you can't give me the answer if the same machlokes was also regarding the leaves of onions, because onions don't last from the 6th to the 8th. Gewaldig. And that's a question. Now, like in the Yerushalmi, the Gemara does not give an answer to this question. Okay? And like I mentioned, Rabbi Yirmiyah, for the wiser people that don't have to defend themselves, he doesn't have to defend himself. What was his solution? That he didn't accept the Braisa. If that Braisa would have been authoritative, then you got a problem. But so what? So Bar Kapara had a brisa. Again, we have this in Bavli. They say it explicitly, right? That kol any Tana that was not taught in the academies of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Shaya is not authoritative. Okay, say it. So, anyways, Rabbi Yirmiyah did not back down. So it wasn't refuted. We got a problem with the brisa. Say it. Also, I understand the Yerushalmi, they were closer to the Tanoim. Maybe they were Bechlal, they weren't so, okay, so the Tana said it. He disagreed with him. Now, in time, by the way, in time and space also, because they were more in Eretz Yisrael. That's why they had Smicha, Rabbi. Okay. And now we have to, before we come again to the second approach, this is Gavaldik. Let's go back. We have this luf. You planted it on the 6th year. Bechlal, the luf, the bulb. This you have to remember. The bulb never gets fully consumed. Basada. Why should something get fully? It's not available in the field for two reasons. Either it's so exposed to nature that the chayalach eat it up. Things that are buried in the ground are hard to get to. Not all the behemoths and chayas can get to it. But then most times, the winter itself destroys it. It gets fafroden and it gets frozen. Leaves don't survive in that cold weather. The loof is unique. The loof itself stays in the ground. It never becomes, there's no more loof. If you planted it, it's going to be there. So it's not subject to beer. The leaves are subject to beer. The leaves come, they protrude above the ground. The leaves do not survive a winter. What happened in our Mishnah was, according to this case, if you planted it on the 6th year, the leaves that grew in the beginning of the 7th year, they died from the winter. But the bulb is there. The onion keeps on producing. The leaves keep on growing. So after the winter leaves came out, that's leaves of the 7th year. You can eat it. It's not svichim. We're going to that, right? We're saying that anyone can take it, by the way. Anyone could have taken it on the 7th year. But you didn't. You left it in the ground. Now it's the 8th year. The leaves keep on growing. Now it's winter. Comes along the owner and he picks it up. Time of beer. He declared. Now he puts it out ownerless, not the bulbs, the leaves. No one took it. He took it back. That's the case of the Mishnah. So there's one other thing you have to acknowledge, and that is Milsei de Rabbi Yirmiyah Amram, from the statement of Rabbi Yirmiyah that we're speaking about this wild luf that is unique. The wild luf, the bulb, is that which lasts for a long, long, long time, and therefore it's not subject to biur. Davar sheyesh loy biur. Shenimsa betoich davar she'en loy biur. Evidently, Rabbi Yirmiyah holds yesh loy biur, which is something not logical. I want you to know. The reason why we need Rabbi Yirmiyah for this, forget about why do you need Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Mishnah, what is the Mishnah talking about? Because Rabbi Yirmiyah is giving you a scenario where the leaves remain connected to the bulb. And even when it's connected to the bulb, and even though the bulb is not subject to beer, the leaf will be subject to beer. That's already a big chiddush. In other words, when I take something out of the ground, once it's disconnected, even though they were growing together, and at some point, one part is consumed and the other part is not, of course, whatever is basada, lebehemta v'lachaya, no beer, whatever is no longer available, you're chayv to do beer. That's when they are not connected to each other. But you're giving me a case where while the leaf is connected to the bulb and it's growing, this is from the 7th year, subject to beer. Why? It's not logical. And that's the Gemara's kasha, ma ovid Rabbi Yirmiyah. In other words, it must be that way, but okay, he can ignore a braisa, but how can you ignore logic? So the Gemara says that you're right. You know what the case is? The case is, that's the last tweak. You planted it on the 6th year, guys. And it grew on the 7th year. And before the time of biur came on the 8th year, because the time of biur of the leaves has to do with winter. During winter, the leaves wither. Is what b'sheshikev be'olin. You pulled off the leaves. You left them on the ground. When the time of biur came, those leaves are not connected to the bulb. You declared it ownerless. No one took it. Then you went ahead and you harvested the bulb and the new leaves and the old leaves. The bulb you keep. The bulb was planted on the 6th. The bulb was harvested on the 8th. Not talk about. The leaves that were then connected to the 8th are your leaves. But you have mixed in, you mixed it in. That's the case. So it's mamash. So what's the machlekes? Mamash Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Now you see how it's really that, because the fact that you pick the bulb and the leaves on the 8th year is almost insignificant now, because what's really happened over here is that there were leaves of shvius that were on the field. The time of biur came and you said, Chevre, it's hefker. You came the next morning and you picked it. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Yaseh cheshbon imo aniyim. Why Yaseh cheshbon? Why not give it to the aniyim? Because since you picked the bulb and the new leaves and you mix them all together, you don't know what's what. Like if there would have been leaves of the 7th year that would have been in the field, right? And you picked it after the biur, according to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, that you're not allowed to pick it, he wouldn't say Yaseh cheshbon imo aniyim. He would say, give it away. It's not yours. You need a lot of details to explain, like what happened. Now you pick the 8th. The 8th bulb had in it leaves. Now you have a mixture. So the Chachamim don't say give it all to the Nim. The Chachamim say keep it all, approximate, and give the money to the Nim. Atkan in first interpretation. Look at that. Says the Gemara.
Wouldn't that like just solve everything?
Let's go with the first explanation in the Rashirilio. That what happened. Let's add another detail. I know I said my approach. The first approach that we read in the Rashirilio. So again, you planted on the 6th. You harvested it on the 7th. You left it on the field, and it took new roots. And it began to grow more. That's what the Rashi Ilius brought down. That's why it's 7th year. You have to go to that. And if you would have taken it before the Zman Habir of the 8th year, there would be no issue. Don't forget, I'm allowed to take produce of Shvius. I can't gather large quantities, but I can take for me to eat. When did I decide to bring all of these alei of this luf to my home? Sometime in the 8th year, after the Zman Abir. Okay, that's what we learned yesterday. See that?
When you can eat it in the field and when you bring it into your house, no?
This is for sure. You can already bring it into the house even on the 7th year. Was if when the person picked the luf on the 7th year, let's go with you have to pick it. When you picked it on the 7th year, it's product of the 7th year. But you left it on the ground. You didn't plant it. And by onions are unique that you just leave it. You put an onion in all of the science projects in your home. You put an onion in a plastic cup, it's going to start giving who knows what, the roots and the balagan. You left it on the field and it took root again. It's not that the bulb grew more. It's that the leaves continue to grow. But by the way, no, very good. When did it continue to grow? On the 8th year. Let me go back to today's Gemara of Svichim. You chap it? So in other words, the leaves that you picked when you picked it, they're not called Svichim because you planted it on the 6th. Svichim has only to do with when you plant it. Very good. When I picked it, let's say, right before Rosh Hashanah on the 7th, at the end of the 7th year, it has to be that way. Because if any of the new growth would have grown on the 7th year, got a problem with Svichim. Whatever grew weiter, grew on the 8th year. And I left it there. And I picked it after the Zman Abir. That's all. You have plots. It's such a rare case. That's why maybe there's another approach. The Gemara gives a much simpler approach. But first of all, to remember that the second approach that we are learning now, we're going to have tomorrow a third approach. The second approach will be that Beneged Machloikes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Daf Ayin Zayin. think it's the 9th chapter, which is after the Zman Abir, L'Ramban, can you take it back or not? That we both follow Rabbi Yehuda. No, Bir means at least only for the Aniyim. I get it, not like the Ramam, you have to burn it. But what's the big deal? Hefker, take it back. Like it's almost like, what are you doing? Who are you fooling? No, you're mafkid it. Aniyim can take it. So that's clear. The problem is, if you are not allowed to take something that grew on the 7th year, and that which grew on the 8th belongs to you, so what is Rabbi Eliezer saying? That will be a big problem. Like, what's Rabbi Eliezer's issue? Im loktu es aniyim, loktu, everyone says it. Yeah, whatever's from the 7th, they took. But then if you took it, after the Zman Abir, you're not allowed to take it. And you have to give it to them. And if you don't know what's what, you have to make a cheshbon with them. Let's go read inside. Everyone follows Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yoisa, the Amoira, Pasar Lomas Nisan, that we're speaking about a bulb that was planted before the Shoshan of the 7th year. And what happened was, you planted it in the 6th year. I'm telling you what, we're saying this. You know why we're saying this? To explain why there's no svichim. Was Rabbi Yoisa also will have to go with some detail that we learned in the first explanation. Also, beitzim lifnei shvius, another detail. Beitzim means the bulb. And since the bulb began to grow, it's not about planting, Rabbi Mendel. It's about when did it begin to grow. It began to grow before the 7th year. So there's no svichim issue. And then it grew. And then the leaves grew. And here is this crushing thing. The crushing, there's two girsois, either with a reish, v'riknoi, but we're going to go with the girsa v'diknoi. That's daled yud, chaf, not kuf, nun vav. And it means to crush. Yeah, is that a modern Hebrew word, Yakir?
Ptuadaka.
Very good. Right away. Here it's with a vav, not with an aleph and not with the hey. There's no machlekes here.
Sure, good. But yeah.
Very good, very good. Okay. So v'diknoi bishviz. So here's the thing. They just don't know the process. Why would people do it? I don't know. I'm not a farmer. But because of the fact that this bulb can stay in the ground, and Mistama, the bulb grows. Not it grows. You want it to be in the ground. For whatever reason, you want the leaves to stop growing. You crushed it on the 7th year. It happened to be that it continued to grow when? After you crushed it. Now, when did you uproot it? What's the issue over here? That in Tamar, if we're going to go with the approach that dikun is like uprooting, that means that since you crushed it on the 7th year, it's called the product of the 7th year, because if the crushing would not be considered uprooting, you planted it on the 6th, you harvested it on the 8th. Where do shvias come in over here? B'chlal. You owe nothing to no one. Even after the Zman Abir, it's not subject to, if it's subject to Mir, and only Aniyim can take it after the Zman Abir. It's not subject to Bir. That's gewaldig. Now, I want to add another detail, guys. All of the leaves that grew before the crushing, who do they belong to? They belong to the Aniyim. If crushing is ikur, then when you crushed it, you uprooted it. Happened to be that you weren't successful in stunting the growth, it continued growing.
That crushing destroyed the existing leaves?
The crushing stops it from growing. Now, if we're going to say that crushing it is like likita, so you made a harvesting on the 7th year, so everything that was there until the crushing, after the Zman Habiyur, belongs to the Aniyim. You with me? The part that grew after you crushed it on the 8th year belongs to you. In Tamar ein dikun ki'ikor, but if we're going to say that crushing it, when do you establish the year of the vegetable? When you harvest it. Lekita. Lekita has to be when you bepoil harvested it. The fact that you did an act of crushing, if we're going to say that we don't view this as ikor, So this whole thing belongs to what year? To the 8th year. If you go with that approach, then ein la'aniyim klum, which is a sheet of Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua is easy to explain. However, misafek, since Rabbi Eliezer has a doubt, he doesn't know whether it is like uprooting or not. He has a doubt. Then yaseh cheshbon im u'aniyim. Now, the problem is, I have a simple problem, Danny. Everyone asks over here. And we'll give you the way Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky explains it. Why do we have to say that he has a doubt? Why don't we say Rabbi Yeshua holds, that's clear. Rabbi Yeshua holds that crushing it is not uprooting it. So you planted it on the 6th, you harvested it on the 8th. The fact that you crushed it, so what? You crushed it. Since you actually picked it on the 8th, it's a product of the 8th year, you don't owe Daniyim anything. Even la'achar zman habir, you don't even have to do beer. Why don't you say that Rabbi Eliezer holds that crushing it is like uprooting, but what happened here is that you didn't actually uproot it. Not only that, more of the leaf grew. So now you have a mixture. So now yaseh cheshbon. Why does the Gemara have to say that Rabbi Eliezer has a doubt whether dikun ke'ikur or lav ke'ikur? That's the problem. And the answer is, Danny, he says a good word, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, of blessed memory, that if Rabbi Eliezer would hold vadai, that crushing it will be uprooting it. You have another rule. Something, it's just like we said before, something, davar sheyesh loy bir, shenimtze betoich davar she'ein loy bir. What we had before, the question on Rabbi Yirmiyah, then logically, that which grows out of the principle should be defined like the principle. Once the leaves that are crushed belong to the aniyim, anything that grows from it, it grew from the aniyim. Then not only would he say yaseh cheshbon, no, even though it continued to grow, once you uprooted it, it's paid a shviz. Whoever owns it will own all of it. Because it knows if Rabbi Eliezer were to hold that uprooting it, that dikun, crushing is like uprooting, then you can't tell me, and now it grew more. And so that which grew before the crushing is laniyim. That which grew afterwards to you, you don't know how much what yaseh cheshbon, that would not work. Why? Because once the ikir, the beginning of the leaf, is considered a product of the 7th year, whatever continues to grow from it is an extension of it. And once it is subject to beard, and we're saying that everyone holds like the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, that after you do beard, only aniyim can take it, all of it belongs to the aniyim. Beautiful. If you were to hold that vadai dikun keikor, so the solution is, since, that's why the Gemara says, since Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, vadai dikun is not ikur. So it's not a product of the 7th year, nekuda, ein laniyim klum. Now, if they would have eaten it on the 7th year, it would belong to them. You have something in the field. There's an onion. You see the leaves coming up. That's what the Rabbi Yeshua said. That im laktu aniyim laktu during the 7th year. They didn't do it. Goodbye, Charlie. It belongs. It's the 8th year. Sure, during the 7th year, not because of beard, because everything that is on shviz, I can go into your field and eat.
Right, but I thought we said they were from the 6th year.
6th year, beniged isur svichim. That's the beauty, that even though there's no isur svichim, Danny, but if I were to pick it, forget about an onion. You're a farmer. You plant a bulb in the 7th year, and the 6th year, yeah. And it grew, and it began to grow. Epis began on the 6th year. You can eat it on the 7th year. When the Chachamim said Svicham or Aser, they were speaking about something that was not planted. It was not beginning. There was nothing there. It got planted, and it started to grow on its own on the 7th year. We resolved the Svicham today. So good. This fits. But this suffix, you have to say the words over here. So insofar as the griefs, so since he has a doubt, so the doubt allows you to say the following: those that grew on the 7th year and they were picked on the 7th year by crushing, for that, because of the suffix, I will consider it likit on the 7th year. that which continued to grow from it belongs to you, because there is a doubt, because maybe dikun is not like ikur, and that's why the owner gets to keep the rest. Now, how much is which? Yaseh cheshbon. But if Rabbi Eliezer, this is so good. What's the biggest chiddush that we learned today is, we have a concept we just learned last week in the parsha about Tumantara, Davar haba min atami tami. Right, this rule, right? Davar haba min atoyer toyer. These general rules. If you have a leaf, if the leaf is classified as the 7th year and it continues to grow, that's gavaldik. Then all of it is considered from the 7th year, even though it grew in the 8th year. The suffix is needed over here. And look how bekitzer everything is. Chavre, will stop here. It's perfect timing.